Today we have Mark Graban, who is an internationally recognized consultant, author, and speaker specializing in lean management, continuous improvement, and fostering cultures of learning. With a background in engineering and management, he has worked across healthcare, industries, manufacturing, and tech startups, helping leaders implement sustainable changes that improves quality, safety, and employee engagement. As a founder of leanblog.org and host of Lean Blog interviews and My Favorite Mistakes, Mark shares insights into leadership, problem solving, and continuously improving. He's a senior advisor in KaiNexus, a software company enabling continuous improvement, and holds a degree in Northwest University and MIT Leaders Global Operations programs. Mark's early career included General Motors, Dell, and Honeywell before he focused on the healthcare improvement in 2005. Just a quick one. I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining me today and being with me on this show. One thing that is really, really important I want to share with you is this show is growing really well, and I'm so proud of it, and I'm so pleased that you're enjoying this content. But if you could please hit the follow and subscribe to this channel, it will really help the channel on its being able to grow and the people that we can have on this show. So please do consider, if you have a moment, please can you hit the subscribe button and the follow button, and I would really appreciate it. Hello, Mark. How are you today?
Hi, Mark. I am doing well. It's really great to be able to talk to you and your listeners. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. It's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of fun, and it's a really interesting. This whole idea of continuous improvement
Mm.
is something like it's like having a mindset, like a growth mindset, is something that is was very popular. I don't know, like 5, 10 years ago. That whole idea of that
Mhm.
growth mindset, and entrepreneurship is something that I think we all think you need to have a growth mindset, but your experience is going to be with working with corporates as well and trying to embed that in. So I'm really looking forward
Mhm.
to this conversation. But the first question I ask all of my guests is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
I think a business mindset is really important for a startup or for a company of any size because I think our business mindsets, to me, it gets beyond what we do and gets more into why we do it and how we choose to be. So I think that includes how do we treat people, what matters to us. I think the best organizations are not just in it for the purpose of making money, that there's got to be some strong connection and driving purpose that leads to business growth and success and sustained profitability, as opposed to all the things that we might just do to chase a dollar or chase a pound, I guess I should say too.
So that whole idea of mission and purpose, I think so. My audience will know I spent 12, 13 years in corporate in big four consultancy firms. And I feel after that experience, that whole idea of mission and purpose gets very much diluted the bigger company it becomes.
Yes.
Because there's so many different divisions, there's so many different areas, arms of the business, that sometimes it's very difficult to have a consistent mission or purpose that fits all. How, working with your clients that you've been working with, how have you found the idea of mission and purpose
Mhm.
for these larger companies?
I would agree with what you said there. As a company grows larger and perhaps gets older, further removed from founders who may have retired or left or even passed away, there's a risk that initial spark and purpose and mission gets diluted or surpassed by other focusing on this year's profit or this quarter's revenues. So I think one thing that I think I felt very strongly, even in my first job out of college at General Motors, which was a large global company of 300,000 employees. It's much smaller now, but in 1995, 300,000 employees, roughly 100-year history, there were still a lot of people at the company that were very passionate about cars and trying to build the best. So I think there's, a combination of like corporate mission and even just personal drive. For GM's famous quality problems, the problem was not the quality of the workers. I think that was an unfair accusation that had been aimed at auto workers for decades. And it was really, I think, excuse making by management.
Mm.
And I think a lot of times the frontline workers had that passion for, we're trying to build the best vehicles in the world. And then the managers have gotten more detached from that. So I think that creates great tension and conflict in an organization. And then when I started working in healthcare a decade later, it was surprising at first, discouraging to again think of the physicians and the nurses and all of the frontline degreed care providers have a deep sense of mission and purpose and passion around helping people, curing people, saving lives. And then sadly, sometimes their administrators are disconnected
Mm.
from that mission, even if their origin was in medicine, but then they've become an administrator. And again, it causes great tension and disconnect. So I think part of my passion, and as we try to grow KaiNexus as a small software company of about 50 people, we've really tried to focus on a sense of mission and purpose that we agree on, and being trying to be very intentional about culture, because I think it's easier to put a organization's culture on a right track and keep it there than it is to come back and try to fix it
Mm.
after it's gotten to be messed up, which I've seen sadly in too many large manufacturing companies, large hospital systems. And again, I think these are not just American problems. These are pretty global problems in my travels.
Let's come back to it, but I just want to challenge you on one thing. So things
Sure.
like oil and gas companies, tobacco industries, insurance, banking.
Hmm.
Now, these industries don't necessarily have a massive mission and purpose versus the areas that you're talking, like GM, which is people loved the cars that were working there, and healthcare, which is obviously there's a very much a mission and a purpose.
Yeah.
So I just
Yeah.
want to put that to the side, and let's come back to it a little bit
Okay.
later, because I want to challenge you on that whole idea of not every industry. It just feels like the industries that you've worked in have that
Sure.
massive mission purpose. So let's just put it to the side, and we'll come back to it.
Okay. Okay.
I
That's
wanted to
fine. That's
ask
fair.
you, tell me one thing about your upbringing which reflects on who you are today.
Oh, I have a lot to thank my parents for. I grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan. My dad was an engineer with General Motors for 40 years. I grew up in a nice location, very stable. And I think one thing that really shaped, I think, who I am is that my parents really valued education and were always incredibly supportive of individual learning, and also within our means creating educational opportunities. Now I went to public schools, and my parents were able to choose and move us to a district that I think was one of the best public school districts in the state of Michigan, if not even more broadly, where that created a lot of like very personalized educational opportunities for me, where if in the first couple of grades of school I felt frustrated or bored, or like the school district created opportunities instead of telling me don't be bored. And I think through science programs that I was able to go to. And so I think there was, I think, a strong emphasis on education and trying to make the most of the opportunities that you have. So I like to think it's almost a cliche now. People say, oh, I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning. I think I'm a very curious person. I think gladly in a different alternate universe, different timeline, that might have been squashed if my
Mm,
curiosity was causing problems for my teachers or for my
mm.
parents. So I think it helped me value education and kept me on a path where that was valued and helped lead to really positive things and great opportunities for me.
Yeah. And I think that's really, as parents, that's the opportunities that you can give your children is really all that the most you can do, and then they can make their own choices on the areas and the subjects and the where they move their life to and things like that. I always think that my kids are still young, but you try and give them the best opportunities for them to be able
Mhm.
to grow as people. And I've always felt that, and that's something very dear to
Mhm.
who I am, and sort of part of my mission and purpose is to give them
Yeah.
the best opportunities they had. So it sounds like your parents were pivotal in where you've been to be able to explore different opportunities and different avenues. Amazing. We're going to fast forward over. You've talked about GM and Dell and how you worked there, but we're going to move 18 years after you were in corporate.
Mhm.
You then decided to leave the relative stability of corporate America and become a business owner as in a
Yes.
consultancy. So what was the inspiration for that change? Yeah, what was the inspiration for that change?
Yeah. There were, I think, a number of factors. I studied industrial engineering, went to General Motors, studied basically manufacturing management and engineering at MIT. I was at Dell. Um, I was already feeling like corporate was not a good fit for me. And I think where I had some catching up to do was that I was not exposed to entrepreneurship as a child. For all of the advantages and opportunities I had growing up, I don't remember any of my friends' parents being business owners or entrepreneurs. It was mostly pretty much everyone worked for a large company.
Mm,
A lot of them were in the auto industry.
I was
So
going to say,
to
yeah.
me, the idea of a life and a career was very much anchored in you have a job. And I had aspirations to move up through leadership ranks of companies, but then you get this feeling or enough evidence of I don't know if this is where I want to be. I don't know if
Mm,
do I figure out how to be a fit or do I find something that's a better fit? So I left Dell to join a startup software company, a company called Factory Logic. That was my first. So I went from, here's the progression. General Motors was 300,000 employees. Dell Computer was roughly 30,000 employees at the time. This software company had about 30. And my question was like, am I going to enjoy this more than big corporate life? In a lot of ways, yes, that was very true. Now we were serving customers who were large corporate companies, so it was good that I had some experience in those settings. We talk about stability. I had ups and downs as an employee of that startup. I was part of a layoff after 9/11 and the economic downturns. I
mm,
ended up coming back to that company and was with them longer the second time than I
wow.
was the first time. And there were some leadership changes and evolution there. But when you use this phrase relative stability, at one point I just got tired of the stress of is this startup going to survive? I craved stability and I over adjusted and I went back to a large corporate setting. And that turned out to be a mistake. But then I had opportunities to work in healthcare, so I got out of that large corporate setting. We've moved a lot for my wife's career. So that gave me an
Okay.
opportunity to find a new position. So I was working as a consultant with healthcare organizations. I wrote and had my first book published, a book called Lean Hospitals. And that created a lot broader exposure where people were learning my name in very indirect ways. I had been blogging, I had started podcasting, so I was doing things that gave a little bit more public exposure to me and my work and my mindset on things. And then because of that, you start get speaking opportunities and consulting opportunities. In 2010, I started working individually. So I formed my own company. It's very much a solopreneur endeavor where I sometimes do have subcontractors working with me. I am often a subcontractor to other larger firms to accomplish certain things. But I think one thing I've learned along the way, and the one co-founder and CEO of KaiNexus is like this. He grew up in an entrepreneurial family. And one thing I learned at MIT when I was first getting exposed to entrepreneurship is they say, like, one of the best predictors of being an entrepreneur is growing up in a
Mm,
family at least with some entrepreneurs. And it's not that you have to have grown up in a family, but it's just more likely you're exposed
Yes.
to those possibilities. And how do you even start a company? And how would you go about raising money if that's something that you needed to do? It was a very roundabout pathway to get there. But the organizations I serve as a consultant, the companies we serve at KaiNexus, again, mostly tend to be big
Yeah.
corporate environments. So it's better to work with them than to work in them,
Yeah.
perhaps, at least
So
for
it's
me.
interesting you say that. So I was brought up in a family that all worked for corporates. My dad worked for corporate, my grandfather
Yeah.
worked for corporate. And the evolution for me was a personal development journey. So started reading about personal development, opened to my mind to things, and it eventually rose into entrepreneurship. And it was a very gradual. So I didn't grow up either in an
Okay. Yeah.
entrepreneurial background. I'm trying to educate my children to be open-minded about this opportunity as well. But and I think it's fascinating, that whole ethos of, I don't want to work in them, but working with them and as a client that
Yeah.
actually works for you, and like you're building on the experience of having been in corporate for 14 years.
Yes. And sadly, I think by nature, I'm the type who is a status quo. If I see something that could be better or should be better, I think I naturally speak up about that. And that is not well received in a lot of larger, older
Yeah.
corporate environments. It's either not welcome or it gets punished. And as an outsider, as a consultant, I'm usually being asked to help challenge the status
Yeah.
quo.
Yeah.
And there's this more self-selecting. Like if somebody's bringing me in, it means they're dissatisfied with the status quo, and
Yeah.
they and I are probably in alignment about at least what general direction
Mm, mm,
they're trying to head in, and I can support them with that. Where I think I learned, sometimes you take a full-time job and companies say a lot of things during the hiring process, and then you come
yeah.
in and you learn, oh, this is not really what was portrayed, or the
Yeah.
company wants the culture to be a certain way, and now the people you're directly working with don't agree.
Mm.
And I think there's far less personal and professional risk trying to help companies from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about lean methodology.
So lean methodology has a lot of roots in industrial engineering going back 100 years or more. um, Modern day, I think what we would call lean, while there are roots in American businesses, elements of what Henry Ford did back in the day at Ford Motor Company, there are historical cases of some British businesses and authors that kind of all together now inspired in different ways Toyota,
Mm.
based in Japan in the 1950s, and in some cases a little earlier even. I think what Toyota then developed from a number of influences became known as the Toyota production system. So this was developed over decades. And then I think by the time we got to the 80s, Toyota and a lot of Japanese manufacturers had changed their reputation as the company that built cheap junk and didn't invent anything.
Mm. Mm.
That the Toyota cars and some of their competitors suddenly had this reputation of, these are high quality, long lasting, inexpensive cars that don't break down as much as the American cars or the European cars. And so the world started taking notice of, oh, there are some ways this company manages differently. And people were studying that at MIT in the late 80s. And as they were trying to describe what Toyota and some other companies were doing, they had to come up with some sort of label. And you think, well, what did the labels matter? I think to people, labels matter. And they were trying to help influence the rest of the auto industry. And I know this from GM 1995. Like on some level, GM knew kind of rationally, yes, we are trying to learn from Toyota and catch up to them. But then emotionally, that was really painful to admit and to
Mm.
accept. So you wouldn't want to say, okay, the rest of the automakers need to adopt the Toyota system. There's too much pride
Mm.
involved
Mm.
for people to want to do that. So these researchers dubbed it lean production, or what often became known as lean manufacturing, lean management. And then in the last 25 years, people in healthcare. And it's sometimes controversial. I'm happy to lean into this. How would ideas from a factory apply in a hospital, including I've done work with a hospital in the NHS in England. And then you have people like Eric Ries who've done adaptations, his book, The Lean Startup.
Yeah.
So this lean term, it's really, I think a lot of it comes down to business mindsets, management philosophy. A lot of it is really deeply rooted in engaging everybody in improvement and innovation. Where I started my career at General Motors, it was a culture of shut up and do your work, check your brain at the door, as we would say here in the US, like a really dysfunctional, disrespectful workplace culture. And I'm not going to claim Toyota's perfect, but there are certainly things that they do that can inspire us or directly teach us some different ways of leading people and improving systems and improving businesses.
So let's come back to this, because I feel you're touching on this as well, this sort of like mission and purpose that these companies have. So I want to loop all the way back to where we started, this whole idea of larger corporates having a mission and a purpose. And as I said, I think healthcare and car industry, my dad was in the car industry. But how do you translate that to oil and gas, tobacco industry, even insurance and banking? How do you explain that do they have a mission and a purpose, or is it really only to make the buck, make the pound, to be successful?
I think that's a fascinating question. There's probably some degree of how would people at a company like that explain or rationalize why they do what they do, and some of it might be utter nonsense. I think Toyota would talk aspirationally about providing mobility to the people of the world. And we know a lot of these vehicles pollute in different ways, whether that's tailpipe emissions or sometimes the environmental damage that goes into creating batteries and electric vehicles. I'm not opposed to electric vehicles, but I think there's this reality of sometimes the noble things that a company does come with a downside. I think it would be harder to rationalize that at a tobacco company. Now, that's not something I would choose to do. I think for an oil and gas company, somebody might say, we are trying to provide energy and we're doing what we can to move the world into cleaner technologies. I don't know if there's debate then of
Yeah,
are
I
they
suppose
just saying that or
I'm
do they
putting you in a
mean it?
difficult situation
Yeah,
here, trying to
yeah.
justify other industries. My point
Well,
was like a tobacco industry, oil and gas, banking, insurance to an extent. They're motivated more by the financial reward, in my view.
sure.
And I'm not saying these guys, there's anything wrong with these as human, moral people. I'm not casting assertions against everyone that works in those industries.
Right.
But it's an interesting just thought process to think about, because
Yeah.
healthcare is so easy to justify. You're helping people survive, helping people live, and that idea of mission and purpose. I've experienced and been involved in organizations that talk a lot about their values, and they might put their values on the wall, but you ask a senior person,
Right.
relatively senior person in that, just explain to me the values. I'm not sure because I'm new. I've been in companies that they haven't got a clue, but it's on their walls and it's told
Yeah.
that this is the mission,
Right.
the purpose, the
Right.
values of the
They,
company.
they may look at the back of their badge where there's a piece of plastic that
Yeah,
reminds them,
exactly.
here are our values. No, I think you can't mandate and dictate the values. And that's where you often get a gap. I remember one time I was in the mode of patient. I was getting an MRI. I was having some back problems. And I'm in the lobby of, this is in the US, it's a private organization that provides these imaging services. And in the lobby, they had it displayed. And it said something like, we are a culture of continuous improvement and, and everybody involving everybody. And I asked the woman at the front desk about that. And she just gave me a blank stare. What are you talking about? And I think she was sitting in a position where literally if she cared to, could be reading that all.
Yeah.
And clearly, like there was a disconnect. But I think at KaiNexus, for example, we have gone through the exercise of listing values and traits of people that are successful within KaiNexus. And it was not dictated by the co-founders. It was very much this exercise of let's get everyone to articulate that. It didn't mean that
Mm.
everybody agreed, but I think there is general consensus about what are our values and how do we treat each other. Very intentionally, it is a culture where leaders don't get upset if an
Mm.
employee disagrees with them or challenges them.
Mhm.
That is just part of the norm, whether that's stated directly on the wall or not. So I think the most important thing is living those values and not letting it degrade as the company gets bigger, as you hire
Yeah.
more leaders who might not share those mindsets or those values. I think the co-founders really worried about, okay, when like hitting 10 employees is a risk point, an inflection
Mm.
point. Hitting 30 employees, now that we're at
Mm.
about 50, what happens someday if we hit 200 employees? Like there's
Mm.
always like these risks of now we're too big to maintain that. But I'll give the co-founders a lot of credit. For example, like once they realized the company got to a point where they were not talking to every single employee every
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
that they had to change their approach.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
values and the how we behave couldn't just come from direct exposure and osmosis,
Yeah.
that you had to start being more intentional about articulating it and making sure now if you have another layer of leadership involved, that
Mm.
they're living it every day as well.
Yeah.
And one other thing I was going to say though about even companies that might seem like they're strictly profit driven, I think leaders can create an environment that creates a deeper connection in people. I was in Japan recently, and there was a company there, a supplier to Japan to Toyota, that you think would be as nuts and bolts, numbers driven, just very corporate. And their company president said, "Our primary objective is our employees' happiness."
Nice.
Wow. And I don't think that was badly translated
Mm.
from Japanese into English. But I think they had this recognition, and I've heard people articulate it in healthcare in different ways. If you care for the employees and the team, they can better
Mm.
care for the customers or the
100%.
patients. And
100%.
that profit is an end result
Mm.
of, and look, their employee happiness didn't mean, oh, we're not going to work this week. We're going to sit, binge Netflix together and have a pint. That's not sustainable happiness. But I think when people are happy that they are participating in the betterment of a company, they're helping strengthen their own job security. I
Yeah.
think there's a way where we can engage people in work that is more fulfilling than just I show up and I collect a paycheck.
Yeah. Fulfillment is like
Fulfillment.
happiness. Happiness is a passing emotion. Fulfillment is what we should be looking for. KaiNexus. So you're an early stage employee. You're now a senior advisor. It's a SaaS business. Why don't you
Mhm.
tell me who you serve and what you do?
So the origin story of who we served at first was that we were serving and marketing toward healthcare organizations, hospitals, health systems, clinics, because our co-founder and CEO is an emergency medicine physician, or he
Okay.
would work in A&E in the UK. So his mission and purpose was around engaging people to improve healthcare. The software product was initially developed when he was working at a university hospital, as a web-based platform. And like a lot of universities, they had a program to help commercialize
Mm.
a business, and that was
Mm.
some of the origin of KaiNexus. So we came to market, our marketing, messaging, our website, even a lot of the language in the software was really all about healthcare improvement. Like, how do we engage people to bring forward ideas and capture and track those ideas in the system? And better yet, let's move forward and implement
Mm.
those ideas for the betterment of patient care, to make work easier, to reduce waiting times, to save money. And so the KaiNexus software platform it's a communication platform as you're doing work. And then beyond employee ideas, we manage larger improvement projects, strategic initiatives, like all ranges of improvement and innovation. But a lot of the core was really in, we need to make more out of our frontline employee ideas. We always like to say we are not an electronic suggestion box, because if you just digitize, and I see you smiling, like we've all probably worked in an environment where
Yes.
there was a physical paper suggestion box, and putting something into that box was a waste of time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we can't have a digital waste of time. There are lessons that come from the lean management methodology. There's a Japanese buzzword, if you'll forgive it, a Japanese word, kaizen.
Okay.
So that's part of the Kai nexus, Kaizen. Kaizen just means good change or continuous improvement. So it's got to
Mm,
be more than a buzzword. It's got to be about
mm,
how people lead, how we interact. But then as we were finding success in that initial healthcare market, because there are companies doing continuous improvement in manufacturing and all sorts of service sector settings, we evolved the marketing messaging and the language and in the software where it wasn't so hard coded of, let's say, patient safety being a
mm,
category of improvement. Like that now can be customized. That could mean you could just call it safety or employee safety. Or we started with a foothold in healthcare. And then as we've grown, thankfully, we found customers pretty much around the world. We're getting larger companies as customers because I think as you get larger, the need for some sort of platform is greater. Like, how does we have a customer that's a mining company that has sites in Australia and South America and in Africa. It's really helpful for them to be able to see digitally and to get alerts when people that have a job similar to me are doing improvements. Let's automate some of the exposure and the communication that then might get people to actually get on a Teams call to actually, excuse me, talk about it live.
So
So the technology, I think, is really helpful, but it doesn't do the improvement for you. It's a
no,
platform.
so let me just delve a little bit, dig into this a little bit more. So it's a platform for people to give best practices, to give suggestions, to give ideas to how to collaborate across large distances, like someone in the UK to someone in Australia. So
Mhm.
it is like we joked about having a suggestion box, but it's more than that. It's trying to get
Yes.
best practices across different divisions and different
or
businesses.
or better practices. I think
Better
there's
practices. Okay.
I think there's one corporate trap where, yeah, there are times we can identify a best practice, but I think in corporate settings when people try to force this
Mm,
best practice on others in a very top down way, sometimes at best you get compliance.
yes.
Where I
Yeah.
think there's a balance where if a team, and it could be even different teams in the same building, if we've developed something we think is better, let's share that with others. And if it's truly better, and there's some human psychology involved and people are complicated, but people will consider better. But then with that comes an invitation to make the better even a little bit better still.
Mm, mm. So
Right. And that's where,
in a way, and I'm very much simplifying it for me, and
uh-huh,
hopefully to make sure my audience is clear. So that whole idea, like Slack and companies like that, that give people a lot of communication across many areas, and they can go onto a forum and they can debate things. So
mhm,
actually, it's just Slack evolved into a wider audience where you can make suggestions, you can share what's working for you, but it's in
mhm,
a SaaS product that instead of
yes.
like a forum style, it's more in a way that can be shared
Well, yeah,
across the divisions.
people can discuss particular ideas or projects as they're being shared. There's, I think, a lot of opportunity to then one other thing people use our software for is tabulating the results and the benefits. So the one simple thing would be to count how many improvements
Mm,
were
mm,
done last year,
mm,
small, medium, or large.
mm,
How many people were involved
mm,
in those improvements? I think another really important metric to distinguish from the suggestion box is what percentage of ideas led to some sort of change.
right,
The benchmark for a suggestion box is usually something like 2%,
right.
because the suggestion box model collects these ideas and they get routed to some committee or some leadership team and they reject most of them or they accept the
Mm, mm,
ones they say yes to the ones they think will have the biggest impact. Well, that discourages everybody else
yeah.
that had an idea that was dismissed. Where the data across all of our customers, it's more of a 75% implementation rate. And that
Great.
doesn't mean 75% of the time. So if you look to the classic Kaizen model, whether you're using software like ours or not, that initial idea it doesn't mean it gets implemented as submitted, but
Mm,
it's the starting point for some discussion, some debate, some experimentation. Now we can start thinking more like entrepreneurs
mm,
internally instead of
mm,
saying, I have an answer, I know it's good, let's go implement it.
mm,
We think a little bit more like scientists. We'd say, I have a hypothesis that
mm,
if we do this, we will get better results. Let's go test that idea and see what we learn. We
mm.
could learn that we're correct, or we could learn, oh, okay, that hypothesis turned out to not be completely true. So let's adapt and evolve a little bit, or let's go back
Yeah,
and try something different. Those are the things that people facilitate and track. But then you can add up things like cost savings is probably the easiest
yeah,
to sum up. But looking at things like quality improvement, safety improvement, better customer service, lower employee turnover rates. Some of those things can be quantified, even if they
yeah,
can't be put strictly into financial terms.
yeah. I get that. So this whole idea of continuous improvement as a mindset, let's just explore
Mhm.
that for now. That whole idea of getting better, improving your processes, improving how you deal with employees, how you deal with clients. What is fundamentally important for a business owner, in your view, why they should have the mindset of continuously improving?
I think there's two elements to it. One is back to the how do we choose to be? We can choose to treat people respectfully. We can choose to create a team environment where everyone's ideas are valued. And that doesn't mean everybody gets their way,
Mm,
but everybody can speak up and point out a problem, share an idea, be engaged in a constructive way. So, on one element, you might say, by my values, that's a better way to treat people. That's how I would want to be treated. We're going to be happier, more engaged, more fulfilled at work. But there's so much evidence just pointing to how it leads to better business results.
mm,
It's just across so many different industries. This is not just a Japanese thing. You can engage Americans and
mm,
people from around the world. That I think the argument would be better business results. And if you think of the old model where maybe at best managers want employees to share ideas so the managers can go and do the improvement, that doesn't scale.
mm.
Managers have limited time, they may have limited knowledge about the details of the work. And I think there's this balance where the frontline employees who are far often ignored, they're the ones that understand the work and the customer contact best.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean they can solve world hunger, if you will. So you can't just delegate everything. You can't delegate huge strategic challenges to the frontline staff. So as Toyota struggles through, how much should they really be committed to electric vehicles versus a mix of hybrids and
mm,
gas engines? Those really big strategic global questions, that's the job of leadership
yeah,
to try to figure that out the best they
yeah,
can. I think trying to engage everybody in improvement, just in my experience, it leads to so many better business results. Even if one of those, and this is a problem in healthcare, like the cost of hiring and replacing employees who got frustrated and quit.
mm,
And a lot of that is they got frustrated and quit because they didn't like the workplace environment. And that's hugely expensive to an organization. So I've seen case study examples. One consulting firm I was working with 2 years ago, as part of university health system, they had a unit that went and provided care in people's homes. The annualized turnover rate within that business was 80% a year,
ooh, ouch.
which was far higher than industry benchmarks. And through a bit of this lean management approach of engaging people, like safety, like one of the most dangerous things in healthcare is going into somebody's home. You could have a dangerous family member. You could have a dangerous dog. This is an American problem. You could have somebody with a gun who's threatening this home healthcare worker or assaulting them. There were a lot of things that management did to focus a lot on employee safety.
Mm,
What do you need to not just feel safer, but to be safer? What can we do from a process perspective? What ideas do you have? And there was just this process over the course of a year of engaging people in improvements that mattered to them, because what matters more than your own personal
Yeah.
safety? I want to help people, but I don't want to get attacked by somebody in the process. They reduced their turnover rates to roughly 15% a year.
That's
So,
great.
I think that was a really important
Yeah.
measure. Now you can think of what are all the other benefits that are going to result from having a happier, safer, more stable workforce. Like now you can do all sorts of improvement work that would have been difficult when you have constantly new people every year.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think you've evolved as a leader?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple ways I've tried to evolve. One was, I think, earlier in my career, trying to escape the engineer trap of feeling pressured to be the one to come up with the answer. Learn how to lead by engaging and facilitating others and not quote unquote doing all the math myself. Like there might be
Mm,
certain math, okay, that I would have to do, but actually, no, that's not, most of my work is not that deeply math related, but just trying to realize how do I engage people and work with them. That is something then I learned even more about from the people when I started working as a consultant in healthcare. I had some great mentors that I was starting to figure out some of those things of, okay, this
mm,
is really a team effort. No
mm.
one cares if you've got the answer if you're not engaging others in the process. So I think that's one evolution. I think a second evolution is working in healthcare. I think got me much more in tune with the idea that, feelings and emotion matter, right? Healthcare, engineering, you think of being very analytical, logical, rational, but there's no ignoring feelings and emotion. We're
Mm,
humans. And I think working in healthcare and working with people that tend to be more of the, yeah, I'm in the realm of feelings and emotions. And
yeah,
if we have to be logical, okay, we can do that too. I think finding some better balance has helped
yeah,
me not just relate more effectively to people in healthcare. I think it's just helped me relate more effectively with people in general. I think
yeah,
that I would say that's even just like growth as a person,
yeah,
not just growth as a leader. I think that's interconnected.
yeah. What's your risk appetite?
My risk appetite.
Yeah. How would you describe it as experience in corporate, working as a consultant, now as an advisor with
Mhm.
KaiNexus? What would you say is your risk appetite now, and has it
Mm.
changed over the years?
It's certainly evolved and changed over the years. I think I started my career with a relatively low risk appetite, but then I think I've learned when I've taken risks. I'm going to quit my job at GM and go back to graduate school, or I'm going to take a risk of moving to Texas, or I'm going to take a risk to go to that first startup. Most of those risks have worked out pretty well. There've been bumps
Of
along the
course.
way and decisions I made that I would consider to be a mistake. But actually, I think that gives me more confidence in having a stronger risk appetite or tolerance. And
Mm,
then I think there's also some dynamics where my wife has an amazing career in corporate life. She navigates that all very well. She's a great leader in that sort of environment. So then in the grand scheme of things for our family, that allows me to do things that are a little bit more entrepreneurial.
mm,
Where if COVID was a big interruption for my business that I'm still recovering from.
mm.
And there's thankfully a little bit less stress just because of our kind of just combined family
Yeah,
dynamics as husband and wife. So there's some privilege to be able to go and do other entrepreneurial things. My wife appreciates and supports that, and there's a lot of partnership there because we've moved a lot for her career. What I do, it's easy. If that risk means we're moving across the country, then we can do that. And it doesn't add a lot of risk to my
yeah,
work. I have a lot of flexibility. So that's the thing that prevents me if I think sometimes a great hospital system right nearby here in the Cincinnati area where we live now because of her job. Like I should go and get a full-time job and be fully committed to what this team is doing. But then I think, but if I do that, then we might be moving in 2 years.
Mm, mm,
And so if I can't really I wouldn't feel right, or if I was really going to make that kind of commitment, it would have to be not just full time, but more than a couple years. So then it defaults back to, see, there's a risk it sounds like I'm avoiding, the risk of taking a full time job and having to quit sooner than I would want. But that kind of keeps me doing these entrepreneurial
great.
things that are especially not location based.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. All right, we're coming
Sure.
to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quickfire questions. They don't need a quickfire answer. The first question is, what's the best decision you've made?
The best decision I've made, I think, I'll say I'm marrying my wife. I'll say from a personal standpoint.
Especially if she's listening to this.
Yeah, no, and we've been married 23 years. She's incredible. I think going to here, actually, I'll go back to it. I think the best decision I made that set up other decisions was choosing my undergraduate university. So I grew up in the Detroit area. The obvious choice, and I would have gotten a great education, would have been to go to the University of Michigan
Mm,
to study engineering. It would have been it would have been very affordable. But because I'm not blaming my parents for this, but they provided these educational opportunities. And there were 2 summers I got to do a summer science camp on campus at Northwestern University near Chicago. And I just fell in love with the campus and the
right,
school. And I wanted to get a little bit further from home
right.
for my college education. And it was a stretch, but we figured out how to pay for that. And I think that really did open up doors, though, in particular, I got a great education there. I think that helped open doors then to do grad school at MIT,
Mm,
because Michigan's a
mm,
great school.
mm,
Northwestern, for what it's worth, is ranked a little bit higher. And I'd like to think that taking the non-obvious choice about
yeah,
which college to go to helped set up other things in life.
yeah.
I don't know if it
And
worked out otherwise.
making that move from outside of your local area and making that move probably made you able to make that move throughout your life. So it
Yeah,
probably
so
was a
there
pivotal
was some
choice.
risk. There
Yeah,
was some risk, and I think it paid off. But yeah, I think that was the best decision. Are you going to ask me
great.
now the worst, or no? What's your
No,
other
I'm not
question?
actually going to ask you the worst.
Okay,
Next question I want to
okay.
ask you is, what's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Best. Got some funny pieces of advice. One thing that really sticks with me is when I was at General Motors, the second plant manager that I worked under was a GM person who was sent to Toyota to learn from them. Long story short, so he came in with a different mindset, different methodology, just different approach, and there was a great just general education from him. But one thing I can still picture very clearly is he had been there for months. Myself and a lot of others, I think, were really hungry for change. And I remember one day I asked him, and this was out in the factory where the old plant manager never. And I remember asking him, Larry talked a lot about these things we're going to do differently, and our quality is terrible, and we need to improve. Like, when are we going to start making all these changes? I was being impatient. And he said, I don't think he was being arrogant. I think he was speaking facts. He said, I know what we need to do to turn this factory around. I've done it at other factories. I know what we need to do here. The people working here don't yet know that I know what we need to do. So so the advice, I think the implicit advice was, and I think this has served me well as a consultant. I'm not saying I always have the answers, but I think he was teaching me that building relationships matters greatly. And he was an engineer. I'm an engineer. We may want to shortcut that and say
Mm,
the math says we need to take action now, and the math says this is the right answer. He was building relationships. He was out there not just being visible, but he was listening
mm,
to the employees. He was building relationships. There's this kind of Toyota cliche. Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast.
right. Yeah.
And I think he was living that. And I think there was a lot of great advice encapsulated in that little interaction.
Mm. Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
Oh gosh, there are so many people at different points along the way. I'm going to give a shout out to one of those people I worked with at GM. Steve is his name. Like when we were working there, and especially in that first year under the traditional GM style plant manager, there were a lot of days I was really unhappy. Why am I doing this? And he was a really good coach and mentor of helping me process and work through the working world. And I knew at some point I wanted to go and do master's degree program. And so Steve was very encouraging. I would have never considered MIT, but he had graduated from that program that's now called Leaders for Global Operations. And he was incredibly encouraging of you could do this program would be a great fit for you. He gave me a push and encouragement where that turned out to be another really good decision that's opened up a lot of doors for me. But again, I probably would have stayed a little safer, closer to
Mm.
home, like University of Michigan. Maybe I would have gone back to Northwestern, something else in the Midwest instead of going to Boston and going to do something different. I'm forever thankful to Steve for the support and the coaching to not give up on that job too quickly and to
Mm.
go. He saw potential in me that I wasn't seeing maybe yet at the
Yeah,
moment.
that's good bosses when people see potential in you, even when you don't. Tell me about a regret that you have.
A regret that I have. One regret I think is leaving General Motors after 2 years because things were really on a good path there. And I learned a lot. Like there was this almost perfect contrast between my first year and the first plant manager, my second year and the second plant manager. Steve was encouraging. I got accepted to the program at MIT. One thing I regret is I could have deferred grad school for a year
Mm.
and seen then what a second quote unquote year of progress at General Motors would have been.
Yeah.
Now, had I deferred that year, I might not have taken the job in Texas. I probably wouldn't have met my wife. So again, like in the grand scheme of things, it worked out well. But part of me regrets a little bit the additional learning of sticking with that at GM another year could have been good for me, but not a major regret. But since I'm thinking about GM, that one does come to mind a little bit. But I
Mm.
wouldn't go back and change. I
No.
wouldn't go back in time and change that decision.
Yeah. Okay. What are you most proud of?
I think I'm proud of my ability to, I think, come from outside of healthcare and navigate healthcare in a way that I think has generally been helpful
Mm.
to people. As an author, and in fact, I grew up wanting to be a journalist. I don't really regret being steered into engineering. I am proud though that I can say I am a writer. I'm an
Yeah.
engineer and a writer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm proud of writing a book was something I wanted to do. I wrote that first book at a younger age than I thought I was going to. And then I've
Mm.
written books every couple of years since. But yeah, I'd say I'm proud of that. Yeah.
Mm. Amazing. Tell me something that most people don't know about you.
And reach behind me and hold up a set of drumsticks.
Ah,
As a kid, my parents also valued and encouraged my interest in music
right.
in ways that were probably my interest in music, especially in playing drums and percussion, was certainly louder and more disruptive than studying math.
Yes.
Um, and even through my senior year in high school, I one thing that was appealing about Northwestern was that they had a 5-year engineering music dual degree program. But I decided, and there's no regret in this, I decided I loved music, but I didn't want to work at it as hard as somebody would have to work at it to become a
Right.
professional
Yeah.
musician. Like
Yeah.
I was taking lessons from a University of Michigan graduate student, and I'm like, I loved playing, I loved performing. The idea of being in a room by myself 8 hours a day
Mm. Mm.
practicing. I'm an engineer and I'm an introvert, but I'm not that much of an introvert.
Mm.
And I decided I have talent, but I don't want to put in the work. And it was probably better. I put in the work in other ways, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But musically, I'm like, music can remain a passion and a hobby. I still play drums. I have an electronic drum set that I love
Amazing.
playing around with. I don't play in bands or orchestras or marching bands or anything, but yeah, people might not know my passion for
Oh,
drumming and music.
amazing. Thank you for sharing that. What does legacy mean to you?
Oh, yeah, that's a deep it's a deep question. In a way, one thing that's appealing about books or even podcasts and YouTubes and recordings is that's part of what creates legacy. I think of leaving something behind that can still be helpful to people. And I think legacy is not just what you've done, but back to this idea of how do you choose to be,
Mm,
right? It's not just what have you done, but how have you treated people along the way. So I think those are a couple elements of it where you try to live up to the standard that you would want to be remembered by.
yeah.
We're all humans. We don't live to
No,
that standard
we don't always get it
every
right.
moment of our lives, but doing a podcast and a book about learning from mistakes, I've tried to be better about kind to myself
Mm.
when I've not I'm like, "Oh, the way I acted that day, I would hate for that to be part of my legacy."
We're all
Um,
human. We all make mistakes. We
oh,
all do things. But yeah, no, I get that. Like
yeah.
wanting to leave something behind
Yeah.
is a regular answer on the show because that that is what legacy is. That your books will always exist.
But they will still
They'll be
exist.
somewhere. They'll be in a library somewhere. Lastly, if people want to find out more about you and your businesses, KaiNexus, and your consultancy, where can they find you?
Yeah. So my webpage for my solopreneur business is markgraban.com. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. Mark Graban is a unique enough name. I'm not the only one out there, but if you search for me, you'll find me. The KaiNexus website is just kainexus.com, KAINEXUS.com. And yeah, I would invite people through markgraban.com. They can learn about the speaking that I do. They can learn about my books, my podcasts, coaching and consulting work that I do. Yeah, I would love it if people come check that out and please reach out if there are ways that you think I can help.
There's so much we didn't get to discuss. Your books, your
Yeah.
speaking engagements, your podcast. It's such a shame we are limited by time. But thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much for being on my show. It's
Well,
been an absolute pleasure hearing your views and your thoughts on business and culture. It's just been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for being on my show.
oh, thank you for having me.
I really hope you've enjoyed that content. It's a really fascinating interview that I've done there. So please do, if you are enjoying this content, please do give it a like. Please do give a subscribe. It'd be really good to boost the subscriptions. It really makes a difference to the algorithm in YouTube. So thank you for that. If you do hit subscribe, hit the bell icon and you'll get all of the content. You'll get notified when all the content is available. Thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated. Thanks a lot.